Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to video 2 of the series of making my fursuit head. Those who watched the first one will know that I intended to make 3 of these videos, but the format's going to be a little bit different than we talked about. Basically, this video is going to be purely the process from where we were last time all the way up to the end. So we're actually going to see the finished fursuit at the end. But it does mean that the review of it, where we talk about the money and the time and things like that, is going to be on the next video, which should be coming out in a few days. So yeah, today we're going to cover what we were doing, how we did it, and what went well and what didn't, what we overcame and what we didn't. So yeah, let's get into that. Oh, one more thing before we get into it. I just wanted to say, if you enjoy any of my stuff, these videos or the shorts that I do, I would love it if you could subscribe. I would love to show you more stuff, and as well as that, if the algorithm thinks that you like it, then they might show it to more people, and then one day when I'm ready to have a fursuit that is suitable for sale, somebody might see it who actually likes it, and then I can get a step closer to my dream of becoming a fursuit maker. So yeah, thank you very much. Anyway, let's get into the video. For the eyes, I made these shapes out of white plastic, which I initially thought were correct because they fit in nicely, but it turns out they actually need to flex to be able to fit in correctly, and once I put these holes in the middle, they did not have the structural integrity to flex. So I spent some time recutting them, trying to find a shape that fit perfectly, but also didn't have to flex to get in. I'll be honest with you, I think that for a more finished look, you're better off buying a set of pre-made plastic eyes and then moulding the face around them. But by this stage in the project, the plastic eyes pre-made would never have fit, so it was better for me to mould the eyes to the shape that I already had. The initial pair that were too big had 60mm eye holes, but these ones only had 50mm eye holes, which was a little bit smaller than I wanted for the pupils, but that's what we ended up with. And talking of the pupils, here they are. Unfortunately, I didn't get the footage of me making them, but it took about 3.5 hours because I'd never used acrylic paints before. Well, probably did at school, but not recently. Yeah, flipping them the right way there, you can see, kind of went for a bit of an anime look, I hope. They don't look too anime on me, but hopefully they will on the fursuit itself. I did a pretty good job in the end of not covering up too many of the holes, but some of them were covered, so I just had to go in with a pin and hollow them out one by one. Once all the holes are picked out and I'm happy I can see through it, I just glue it onto the eye blanks that I made earlier, and here you go. These will stay like this for a bit now while I work on the lining. For the lining of the head suit, I had seen somebody used a pre-made balaclava and just kind of glued it in and edited it a bit, which sounded the easiest option, but I don't think many fursuit makers do that. I think they make them bespoke. In addition to that, I really wanted to practice sewing before I got on to sewing the stuff that you can actually see on the front. I started by putting masking tape on the inside of the bucket head. If you're confident of your symmetry, then you can do this on just half of it and then repeat the pattern on the other side, but even on the inside I'm not confident of my symmetry at this point, so I decided to masking tape the whole way around. Once I've got the tape on, it's time to take the tape back off again. I was warned this would be fiddly, and it is, but it's not too bad, it's not too painful. And then once the pieces are out, you just have to cut darts into them to make them flat. I then put them onto some paper so that they're not sticky anymore, and then use those as my templates on the fabric. I took a little shot of the inside so you can see what I've been working on. Here you can see the darts where I've cut into it and then put it back together, and you can see my little markings. All these notations are going to make it a lot easier when I'm transferring the pattern to the fabric. Talking fabric, these are our 2 fabrics. The first one's a scuba knit. I guess it's what swimsuits are made out of, and it's kind of stretchy and shiny. And the second one is our minky, and this one's really super soft. It kind of feels like what teddy bears are made out of. It's really nice. For drawing the patterns onto the lining, I used a chalk pen. I pressed on way too hard and it leaked through the fabric and made a right mess, so that wasn't great, but I learned my lesson. And then later on in the project I bought some heat sensitive pens, and you could get those in white, and that means that if something does show through, you can just put a blow dryer on it and it'll come right off, so I'd probably recommend that. I hadn't realised this yet, but I'd done some of these the wrong way around, and it cost me many hours work, so you can literally watch me making a mistake right now, which I'm not going to realise for like a day. So in terms of the sewing, the first day was definitely the most painful. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to use the machine. Obviously, I was just learning. And yeah, it was a real challenge. Not helped by the fact that at the end of it, I realised I'd messed up and had to basically undo everything I'd already done, which I just wanted to cry about. Then here you can see, as I'm taking it apart, the first day's work. It's only putting 4 pieces together, but I was proud of it, so I was pretty disappointed when I had to take it apart. Plus, taking it apart kind of takes a long time. The reason I had to take it apart was, as I said, I had done it on the wrong side of the fabric. I should have turned the patterns over to the other side because it was aligning. I was kind of working so I could see the pretty bit on the outside, but if you think about it, the pretty bit needed to be on the inside because what I considered the outside was getting glued to the inside of the head, and then when you looked up into it, you needed to be able to see the nice side in there. So yeah, recutting the fabric. Normally I do a voiceover on my thoughts about this while you're watching me painstakingly do hours and hours of sewing, but for once I actually had the foresight to do a little video at the end, so I'll show you that instead. Okay, 3 nights? I think 3 nights, and many hours later, we've created this monstrosity. It looks really creepy, doesn't it? From this angle, this like weird gas mask looking thing. Yeah, this is obviously inside out because this is all going to get glued into the fursuit, and when you look up into it, you're going to be able to see the other side. So I'm just going to turn it inside out so you can see what you would actually see if you looked up into it. I would say this looks better. I'm not sure it does. It still looks pretty creepy, but I'm just going to bring it over here. So you can see that here are my seams. Then looking at the front, these are obviously going to go through the eyes, and then I'll stick those in. And this is the minky, nice and soft. That's going to go on the inside of the mouth, and this bit is going to touch my nose, which is going to actually feel really nice. It's really soft. So yeah, that's the top jaw, that's the bottom jaw. Yeah, and then these are the shoulder pieces. Yeah, it's not too bad. Like, the first day was horrible. I don't love doing stuff I've never done before. I don't love doing things I've never done before because you're not going to be good at them. I like being good at things. So the first day was tough, and it didn't help. I made a ton of mistakes and I had to redo everything, but then the second day was better and the third day was better again, and by the end I was actually really enjoying doing it. Like, there's something quite therapeutic about it, just like pushing the fabric through. I don't know, it just feels nice. So yeah, and I'm not unhappy with where we ended up. I know it's not symmetrical, but it was never going to be because the inside of the head isn't symmetrical. So yeah, that's where we've ended up. Let's get this stuck into the inside of the fur head, and then we will have a lined fur head. Exciting. Thank you, past me, for those thrilling insights. Yeah, as a younger guy said, the next step was to glue in the lining. This was pretty simple to do. The only thing to make sure of was that you were smoothing in the glue as you were putting it in, and try not to burn yourself as well, which I had a 50-50 success rate with. After the lining was in, I glued the eye blanks from earlier into the pockets, and then I used EVA foam to create a border around those eyes, which is going to be necessary to make them follow me eyes when it's all finished. I used the flashlight on my camera to awkwardly show you the inside of the lining. It's okay, around the mouth it's a little bit creased, you can see, but the rest of the head is gone in nice and smooth, and the seams don't look too bad, so I'm fairly happy for a first try. And then here you can see where I've glued in the minky to the inside of the muzzle, so this is nice and smooth. I did actually make a mistake doing this, but you'll learn about that later, as I did. And here's what it looks like on. Kind of creepy with the eyes and no skin. But yeah, this is where we're up to. The next stage is to make the surrounds for the eyes. I'm making these out of black plastic, but I have very limited amount of that, so I'm practicing in foam until I get the perfect size. You can see me here just playing around with it. I want it to fit perfectly between the eyebrow bean and the bottom of the chin and the side of the face and the nose, so it has to be exactly precise. Once I'm happy with the shape, I transfer it onto black plastic, and it looks a little something like this. Wow, he's a visionary. Wow. Okay, that was weird. Thank you. Anyway, once those are in, I work with tiny bits of foam just around the edges, trying to smooth the transition between the black plastic and the foam that's already on the face. So while I've been working, I've been thinking a lot about my final design, and obviously that's going to be a lion, and lions have manes. I had been thinking that the difference between the short fur on the face and the long fur of the hair was going to be enough to create a good mane, but the more I'm thinking about it, I'm really worried that it's not going to be a very impressive mane, and the worst thing is having a lion with an unimpressive mane. So I decided to go back in with some height on the head and some thickness on the cheeks. This is really going to make that mane pop, I'm hoping. It's fun going back to the foam after so long, and I don't know if it's just because I was doing little bits or because I was more confident, but it was not a very long time that I had to work with this to create something I was happy with. And I feel like the final effect of what he looks like after I've done this is much better than at the start, so I'm really pleased I made this change. So I stupidly forgot to show you guys what he looks like with those last foam layers on, so here's a little picture from my phone. You can see how that additional foam really makes a difference to the overall shape of the head. And you can see I've added minky around the eyes and the ears. The reason for the eyes is just to further soften that transition between the foam and the plastic, whereas the ears, it's to strengthen the bond between the ear foam and the head foam. So now that the base was finally done, it was time to make patterns for the fur. I drastically underestimated how long this was going to take. In my head it was like 2 hours. I normally show you the timings at the end of the video, but I just got to share this with you now. It took me 3 hours to get the tape onto his head. It took me a further 1 hour 45 minutes to draw the lines on, 4 hours to cut the tape off his head, 2.5 hours to turn those tape pieces into patterns, then 6 hours and 45 minutes to cut the fur, and then another 1.5 hours on pre-shave. That meant I spent a total of 19.5 hours getting from this stage to the point that I could actually start sewing. That was crazy to me. That was as long as I spent on the foam. So if you want to see what 3 hours of head taping gets you, it's this. To be fair, it does look kind of cool. It kind of looks like an albino rhino. No, not rhino. Albino lion. Yeah, I'm making a lion, that's it. I didn't really think the foam could breathe anyway, but this never felt more claustrophobic than when I tried to wear it covered in tape. So once he's all taped up, I start marking out my pattern pieces. I begin by marking out his features and where the different colour furs are going to be. I then go into more detail by marking out concave areas which are going to need to be different pieces of fabric even though it's the same colour fur. I then annotate the pieces with the fur direction, fur colour, fur length, and number them. Something I hadn't seen advised anywhere else, but I was pleased I did, was I numbered all the pieces on the left hand side in odd numbers and all the pieces on the right hand side in even numbers. This made things a lot simpler later when I was trying to work out which piece was going where. Once I'm happy with my annotations, I'm cutting off each piece very carefully with an X-Acto blade. Once each piece is free, I'm outlining it on the foam and I'm putting a number on it, so that way I can reference pattern pieces to the head base itself. Break so fast. I thought this was pretty cool. Check out what these pieces look like around on the head base. You can see all my annotations and what I've drawn and what needs to go where. And then here's a picture of what it all looked like laid out on the ground. How different is that? I just think that's pretty cool. And we are on to the fur cutting. So first off, look how hard my pets are trying to get in the way. I do think it's partially they want my attention and it's partially the excitement of a new fabric that they can sit on and play with. And me being the cat and dog dad that I am is literally trying really hard to work around them rather than just move them. It's cute when they like stuff. So, as I said, the fur cutting took about 6 hours. I think the reason this took so long was because I was trying to work out whether to do it with an X-Acto blade or whether to do it with scissors. I really was trying not to cut the fur off, just the backing. I think my takeaway is the scissors are probably better. With the X-Acto blade, if you press too hard, you're going to cut the fur anyway, which is really negative. And also, the X-Acto blade goes blunt super quickly. I don't know, I'm going to try purely using scissors next time and we'll see if it's any faster. Here you can see I did my pre-shave. I was super nervous about this. I knew there was no coming back from what I did, and also I'd heard other people complain about this bit. I actually enjoyed it. I think a major mistake I made was I'm using human hair trimmers and I should be using a pet trimmer. Either that or I just went too hard, but I ended up cutting the fur too close, and I'll show you at the end the impact that had. So, in addition to the 19.5 hours I spent prepping the fur, I spent another 19.5 hours sewing. I'm not going to show you all the footage for this because it would take way too long and be way too boring, even sped up to 1,000 times the normal speed. What I will say over a bit of the footage is that I used a technique which I saw advised on TikTok. This was to use a zigzag stitch right at the end of the fabric, which meant that you had no seam allowance, you had to cut off afterwards. I like this approach. The only thing I did different was I sealed it with a straight stitch after I was done. I learned this about halfway through when I realised that some of the stitches were pulling apart too much. I think the major mistake I made while I was sewing was that I was not brushing out each seam in between finishing it, and I think this meant some of the fur was getting trapped in the seams. I think also when I went over with the straight stitch, this really solidified that the fur was stuck in that seam. This meant that the finished product had some sewing lines on it. I did my best to try and reduce these once I saw that the problem had occurred, but it was probably a little bit late by then. So yeah, my main takeaway would be to brush out the seams as you're working. Check out this finished face. I think it's kind of creepy, but also I'm kind of impressed with myself. I'm just showing you up close here. You can see all the seams. You can see what I was talking about where I was doing a zigzag stitch, so you didn't really get the seam allowance at the end. I mean, sewers can tell you better than I can. To me, I was impressed with this. I feel like it looked pretty clean from my perspective as a novice, and yeah, I think it just reflected the hour's work, so I was happy. Talking of creepy, here it is on the foam without being glued down. How horrifying is that? When I was gluing the lining in, I told you about a mistake that I made that I'll tell you about later. Well, that mistake was that I glued the mouth all the way to the edge, leaving absolutely no space whatsoever to sew the inside of the mouth to the mouth fur. I tried to make this work and even saw some advice online that if you try and heat up the glue with a hairdryer, then you should be able to sew it, but I put so much glue on this thing around the edge that there was no way I was going to be able to save it. So eventually I had to admit defeat and decide to just glue the mouth together, but it's something I've learned for the future, to leave some space there so that you can sew it together. Having given up on that, I decided to glue the fur to the face. I thought I did a good job of this, although I did burn my hands a couple of times, which was really painful. But looking back at it, the face is not as symmetrical as I'd like, and I thought that the mistake I'd made was in the patterning, but looking back at the pattern, I can see that it wasn't nearly as unsymmetrical as the face was itself. So I think it's a little bit of everything, a little bit of patterning, a little bit when I was sewing, and a little bit at the gluing. So yeah, at this stage I'd just say make real sure that you're being symmetrical as you're laying it down. I'm hoping during that last time lapse you were able to see that I put some magnets on his head before I glued the hair down. This was because I decided the top of his head just didn't match the rest of him for how impressive his hair was. So I decided to make a little magnetic hair piece which you could add or take off depending on how big you want his hair to be. This was pretty easy to make. I just made a teardrop template of about the right size and then cut 2 pieces of fur, sewed them together and put in the magnets in the fur. There are some really good tutorials if this is something you want to do, but yeah, it was nice to have a little piece that you could add on or take off. It adds a little bit of customization. And here he is at the end with his fur glued down and his hair on. You can probably see that symmetry problem I'm talking about, but I'll talk about that a bit more when I review him at the end. And yeah, I think I'll just show you here, taking the hair off and adding it on. It's really, really easy, and he looks funny without it. Okay, we can officially say we're at the home stretch, so finishing touches. First one is shaving the fur. Now it's on the face, so that means getting rid of the pets because I think that the fur would probably be bad for them. Bye bye. And also we've got to put a mask on so that we don't breathe in that fur either. There we go. I mentioned during pre-shave that I think I had the wrong trimmers, and this is where I do the majority of the damage with them. I'm pretty pleased with what I'm doing as I'm doing it, but I think I'm just getting closer and closer and closer. Like I said, I think this could definitely be partially my own fault for the way I'm doing it, but I also think if I had the right trimmers I could probably get the effect I want without having to get so close. Here's the initial look after the shave. From a distance it doesn't look too bad, he looks a lot more as he should, but up close you can see that the seams are very noticeable from the sewing, and also I've got a few bare patches showing where I've shaved too close. So let's see if I can show you one. Can you see this hole under his eye? That's quite a big one, and then there are some other bits. It shows up more in person than on camera where he's just too closely shorn. So that sucks. There's not a lot you can do about it. There is one thing I tried which I'll show you in a minute, but yeah, this is where we're at. The techniques I saw on the ice around, I think I found on like a YouTube short. The idea is to use clear tape instead of masking tape to template, so that way you can see through to underneath, and then that way when you draw on with the Sharpie you know exactly what shape you're making. It worked really well, to be honest. And then I used EVA foam and just cut out the shapes that I created and stuck them onto the eyes. Pretty simple, really. Then for the mouth, I covered the line between the inside and the outside with a layer of fabric, just to make the transition look a lot neater. And then I got working on the teeth and the tongue. I think the technique I used for this was also something I saw on YouTube Shorts. It was making a pattern out of white fabric and then using thread to separate each tooth rather than like creating each one individually. I'll show you at the end what that looks like. I tried really hard to machine sew these, but I think I was a little bit intimidated by hand sewing. The pieces were just way too small and it wasn't going to happen, so I learned hand sewing finally to get the teeth looking right. Oh, look at me, hand sewing away. Unfortunately, my file corrupted where I was finishing the teeth and the tongue. The tongue was super quick. The only thing that took some time with that was that I'd made the first one the wrong size. So I'll just have to show you the finished product here. Okay, so firstly, here's the tongue I made that was too small. It looked really creepy in his mouth. Looks about the right size for my mouth, though. And then, yeah, here's the finished teeth and tongue. So you see the tongue's nice and juicy. And, yeah, there's the teeth. They look like individual teeth, don't they? Which I'm pretty pleased with. But, yeah, they're actually just separated by thread. And then I made those out of minky, so the teeth look quite furry, which I feel two ways about. Like, it's pretty cute, but maybe it would look better if they weren't furry. I'm not sure. So the technique that I'd found which helps with bald patches and things like that is to use a felting needle and cutting off some fur from some spare fabric and then literally needling it into your fabric where you have the bald spot. I tried this for a few hours and had a bit of a mental breakdown. I think it was mainly because I realized that the imperfections at this point were unfixable. And I think it took some time to let it go because I'd worked so hard on it to accept it wasn't perfect. The felt needling idea is not a bad idea, particularly for little bald patches. I'll show you at the end, but like one little bald patch got perfectly cured, you wouldn't even notice. But bigger areas where I'd shaved too close and I was just trying to fill those out, it wasn't working. I think one of the major issues is if you have glue behind the fabric where you're working, it's not going to work. The felting needle isn't going to be able to do its job. Even if you warm that glue up, the needle gets glue on it, the hair gets glue on it, it's not good. It doesn't really work. You kind of need like a clear backing. And another problem is that the fur afterwards just looks a little messy. It's hard to make it look neat on a big scale. So here's a close-up. The patch I showed you earlier underneath the eye, the bald patch, you can barely even see anymore. You can just about see where there's a slight difference in the fur. And then here at the front, you can see where this kind of messier furs come in, where I've tried really hard to fix it. And I did a little bit on the nose, but I had to give up at that point because it just wasn't working. Making the decision to cut my losses and move on, thought it was time to sew this guy up and attach the front to the back. In trying to do that, I realised something wasn't adding up, so I had to do a little bit of detective work with the templates to realise I put a piece under the chin in the wrong place. So unfortunately some unsewing and then some bits that I'd machine sewed I had to hand sew together. So that was all a little bit time consuming and painful, but these things happen. Once that was sorted, it was just a case of sewing together all the seams. I was using invisible stitches here, and this was something I had put off for such a long time. I was really scared to do this. I didn't really like the idea of sewing in the thick fur there, but it wasn't painful at all. I actually didn't mind doing it at all, and it was nice to see him finally finished. We did it! We got to the end! Hey, if you stuck around for that whole video, well done. Okay. The guy. The dude. Finished! The finished lion! Cool. Okay, cool. So yeah, like I said, we're not going to do a whole review now. We're going to do that in the next video where we're going to talk a bit more in detail, and I will go through what is right and what is wrong. I'm sure you have opinions already. In fact, if you want to put something in the comments about what you think, or if you have any questions or anything like that, then I will happily answer them in the video in a couple of days. Alright. Okay, yeah, but this is the guy. Thank you very much for watching. I'm just going to put him on. I don't know if the audio is going to pick up if I put him on, but I'll put him on and then we'll say goodbye. And yeah, and then we'll catch up in a few days. Oh, by the way, halfway putting him on, something I didn't show on the video was that I did a lining. Well, I mean, you saw I did lining, but I attached the lining to the thing, which was like the last thing I did, but there was no point recording it. So yeah, that was one more little bit. Right. What do you think? Do I look good? Can you hear me? Am I muffling? I bet I'm muffling. Yeah, okay, here it is on. Cool. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.